There was a moment in American history when children stopped asking for fruit. Not because they didn't like it, not because it wasn't available, but because something else had learned to speak louder. By the time anyone thought to ask why, an entire generation had already been raised on the answer. In 1984, the Kellogg Company spent more money advertising to children than the entire U.S. Department of Agriculture spent promoting nutrition education that year. This wasn't an anomaly, it was the standard. Saturday mornings became a carefully orchestrated ritual. Between the hours of 7 and noon, nearly every major food corporation in America competed for the same thing: the attention of children too young to read ingredient labels but old enough to remember jingles. The average American child saw more than 25,000 television commercials each year. 40% of those commercials were for food, and 91% of those food commercials were for products high in sugar, fat, or sodium. This didn't happen by accident. It happened because in 1978, the Federal Trade Commission proposed a ban on advertising sugary products to children under 8 years old. The proposal was specific, modest, and based on emerging research about cognitive development and persuasion. The industry response was immediate and overwhelming. Lobbyists called the FTC the national nanny. Congress was flooded with calls. Within 2 years, the proposal was dead, and the Commission's authority to regulate children's advertising was permanently restricted. What followed was not a return to normal, it was the construction of a new normal. Cereal boxes began featuring cartoon mascots with names like Count Chocula and Frankenberry. These weren't characters that existed in stories children loved. They were characters invented specifically to sell products to children. The mascots had personalities. They had catchphrases. They became, for millions of children, more recognizable than historical figures taught in school. Fast food chains introduced playgrounds, toy giveaways, and mascots of their own. A meal became an experience. Eating became entertainment. And the line between nourishment and marketing dissolved so gradually that no single moment marked its disappearance. By the mid-1990s, the average American child could identify the McDonald's logo before they could recognize their own name in writing. This was treated as cute, as harmless, as proof of good branding. No one called it what it was: the deliberate cultivation of desire in minds that had not yet developed the ability to resist it. Before this, there had been something else. Not an idyllic past, not a world without sugar or convenience, but a different set of defaults. In the 1960s, the most popular after-school snack in American households was fruit: apples, oranges, bananas. Not because parents were more virtuous, but because that's what was normal. That's what was within reach. That's what children expected. By the year 2000, the most popular after-school snack was a pre-packaged product containing more than 30 ingredients, most of which did not exist in nature. School cafeterias used to prepare food on site. Lunch ladies, women who worked in the community, who knew the children by name, cooked meals from raw ingredients. The food wasn't gourmet. It wasn't always appealing, but it was recognizable. Then came cost-cutting. Then came centralized suppliers. Then came frozen, pre-formed, pre-seasoned products shipped in bulk and reheated on site. The lunch ladies were retrained as distributors. The kitchens became warming stations. In 1980, the average school lunch contained 1 or 2 processed items. By 2005, nearly every component of the average school lunch had been processed, packaged, and branded by a corporation that also advertised directly to the children eating it. The kids didn't protest, they preferred it, because they had been taught to prefer it. Grocery stores reshaped themselves around this new reality. The produce section was pushed to the perimeter. The center aisles, the most valuable real estate in the store, were reserved for packaged goods with the longest shelf life and the highest profit margins. Entire aisles were dedicated to breakfast cereals, rows and rows of brightly colored boxes, each one competing for a child's attention at eye level. The healthier options, the ones with less sugar and fewer dyes, were placed on the top shelf, out of reach, literally. Parents were told they were empowering their children by letting them choose, that it was a form of respect, a way of building independence. But choice is only meaningful when the options haven't been curated by someone with something to sell. Sugar is not just a taste, it's a signal. When a child consumes sugar, their brain releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter involved in reward, motivation, and memory. This is not inherently harmful. Humans evolved to seek out energy-dense foods because for most of history, calories were scarce. But the foods being marketed to children in the late 20th century were not designed to satisfy hunger. They were designed to bypass it. A single serving of a popular children's cereal contained more sugar than a glazed donut, but it was sold as part of a complete breakfast. It was marketed alongside images of happy families, athletic children, and bright mornings. The child's brain learned to associate that surge of sweetness not with indulgence, but with normalcy, with comfort, with love. By the time that child reached adolescence, their taste preferences had been fundamentally shaped. Studies would later show that early exposure to high levels of sugar, salt, and fat recalibrated the palate, making less processed foods taste bland by comparison. An apple, which once tasted sweet, now tasted like nothing. Water, which once quenched thirst, felt insufficient next to beverages engineered to be hyper-palatable. The child didn't choose this. The child inherited it. And when that child became a parent, they passed it on. Not out of malice, not out of ignorance, but because it was all they knew. Because the effort required to undo it was enormous. Because the system was designed to make the convenient choice the only realistic choice for families with little time and less money. There's a reason the most heavily marketed foods were also the cheapest. In 1973, the U.S. government began subsidizing corn production at unprecedented levels. The goal was to stabilize prices and ensure a reliable food supply. The result was a glut. Millions of tons of corn with no clear destination. The food industry found a use for it. Corn could be processed into high-fructose corn syrup, a sweetener cheaper and more versatile than sugar. It could be fed to livestock, making meat cheaper to produce. It could be turned into oil, starch, and dozens of other ingredients that extended shelf life and reduced costs. Within a decade, high-fructose corn syrup was in everything: bread, yogurt, salad dressing, ketchup. Foods that had no reason to be sweet were suddenly laced with it. And because corn was subsidized, these foods became affordable in ways that fresh produce never could be. A head of broccoli cost more per calorie than a box of snack cakes. A bag of apples cost more than a 2-liter bottle of soda. Families on tight budgets did the math. The choice was rational, but the outcome was not neutral. Children in low-income households consumed, on average, twice as much sugar as children in wealthier households. Not because their parents cared less, but because the cheapest calories were the most processed. The industry called this progress. They called it democratizing food, making it accessible. They didn't mention that they were also democratizing diabetes, obesity, and metabolic disease. In 1970, childhood obesity in the United States was so rare that it wasn't tracked as a public health concern. The rate was estimated at around 5%. By 2000, it had tripled. By 2020, nearly 1 in 5 American children was obese, not overweight, obese. And the conversation around it shifted in a peculiar way. At first, there was alarm. Then came studies. Then came debates about personal responsibility, genetics, and willpower. Then came an entire industry built around managing the condition rather than preventing it. Weight loss programs for children, bariatric surgery for adolescents, medications to control blood sugar in kids not yet old enough to drive. The question of how it happened became less urgent than the question of what to do about it now. And in that shift, something was quietly accepted. This was the new baseline. Teachers stopped being surprised when students brought energy drinks to class. Doctors stopped being surprised when 10-year-olds presented with high cholesterol. Parents stopped being surprised when their children rejected vegetables outright. It became normal to expect that children would need to be tricked into eating real food, that vegetables would need to be hidden in other foods, that fruit would need to be coated in chocolate or blended with sugar to be appealing. The food industry offered solutions: gummy vitamins shaped like cartoon characters, squeezable applesauce in portable tubes, smoothies with 40 grams of sugar marketed as health foods. The problem was treated as a failure of the child's palate, not a success of the product's design. Here's what wasn't advertised. A child who grows up on processed food doesn't just prefer it. Their body begins to depend on it in subtle ways. The gut microbiome, the ecosystem of bacteria that lives in the digestive system and influences everything from immunity to mood, is shaped by what it's fed. Diets high in sugar and low in fiber favor certain types of bacteria. These bacteria send signals to the brain, reinforcing cravings for the very foods that sustain them. The child isn't just choosing. The child is being chosen for. And this doesn't end with childhood. Adults who were raised on processed food in the 1980s and 1990s are now raising children of their own. Many of them struggle with the same cravings they had as kids. Many of them suffer from conditions that were once rare: type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, metabolic syndrome. They want better for their children, but the system hasn't changed. The same corporations that shaped their childhoods are now targeting their kids. The mascots have been updated. The platforms have shifted from TV to YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. But the strategy is the same. Make it fun, make it friendly, make it feel like freedom. And the parents, exhausted and overworked, reach for what's familiar, for what's fast, for what their kids will actually eat without fight. The cycle continues. Not because anyone intended it, but because it was built to continue. There's a photograph from 1983, a school cafeteria in Ohio. Rows of children eating lunch. On every tray there's a carton of milk, a serving of vegetables, and a piece of fruit. It's unremarkable, mundane even. But if you showed that photograph to a child today, they might not recognize it as lunch. Something happened between that moment and this one. Something systematic, something that didn't announce itself. Children didn't stop liking fruit because fruit changed. They stopped liking it because they were taught to want something else. And the teaching was so effective, so pervasive, so woven into the fabric of daily life that it didn't feel like teaching at all. It felt like choice. But this was never just about food. It was about who gets to shape desire, who gets to define normal, who profits when a generation grows up craving things that didn't exist a generation before. And this, all of this, was only the beginning.